Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com. In this video we're going to take a look at method references in Kotlin. Let's start by creating a little class here. I'll create a person class as usual, and we'll give this a name property of the type string. Then I just want to give this class one method so that we have something to demonstrate method references with. Let's give it a method called show. And so that I can show you what a method reference looks like with a parameter, I'm going to give this a parameter called greeting, again of type string. Now within this method I'm just going to do a print line, and we're going to print this greeting, so $greeting, and the name, so $name. Now let's create an actual person. So val, I'll just call this p equals person. Let's call him Bob. And then of course if we want we could call bob.show. And to show I have to pass some kind of string. So I'm going to write here, my name is. Now let's run this and see what it looks like. So it just says my name is Bob. Now imagine that show was actually a freestanding function rather than a method. Imagine it's not part of a class. And we want to create a variable that refers to that function for some reason. Maybe we want to create a function that has a parameter that could accept something of this type, for example. Or maybe we just want a variable that refers to that for some other reason. So I'll create a variable here which I'll call greet. And if I wanted that to refer to a freestanding function that resembles this, what would the type of this be? Well, we'd have round brackets here to denote a parameter list, and we've got one parameter in there of type string. The return value of this function is just the default unit. So let's write unit here. And to actually make this refer to a freestanding function like this, as we've seen, we would write : and show. However, that doesn't work here, which is why show is coming up in red. If it did work, I would now be able to write greet, and we could put something here like I am, and when we call it, we would hope that we will get I am Bob coming out as a result, assuming this somehow refers to a person with the name Bob. Before I explain how we have to change this in order to refer to a method rather than a function, I just want to mention a bit of kind of almost obsolete terminology that was popular in the early days of object-oriented programming. I say early days, in fact if you bought a book about object-oriented programming even in the 90s, there's a chance it would talk about messages and recipients or receivers. So there used to be this idea in OO programming that when you call a method, that's like sending a message, and a recipient or receiver of the message, the thing that gets the message, is the object that you call it on. So here we're sending a show message to the recipient, which is a person object. That terminology caught on to an extent, but I would say it's not really that widely used now. However, we can still find traces of it, for example, in what I'm about to show you. So part of the problem with the type of this greet variable is that it ignores the fact that we actually want it to refer to a method and not a function. We can't call this without a recipient, in other words, without an object to call it on. We have to change this type so that it mentions the type of the recipient, which would be person in this case. So before I mention the parameter list here, I can write person dot. So now we've named what kind of a thing this is actually going to refer to. Now when I make this refer to the show method, there I also have to say that this is not a freestanding function, but it is a method of the person class. So before these two semicolons, I also have to write person. And now you can see that it is valid Kotlin. Nothing is in red anymore. And this kind of also explains where this : syntax comes from, because in many languages you can in some contexts refer to a method of a class with this : syntax. It's just that if you have a freestanding function, there's nothing in front of the double colons. So this variable now refers to a method, but we can't actually call the method without having a valid object to call it on. We have to specify that when we try to run the method that greet refers to. So here I can write p.greet, for example, because I've got a reference to a person object in this p variable. This looks like I'm now calling a method of person via an object. But in fact, it's not a method. It's not even an extension function. It's just a variable that can refer to methods of the person class. So let's run this and see if it works. And you can see it now says, I am Bob. Now, back before object-oriented programming was widely used, a lot of programming was done in C. And there, if we wanted to bundle a data structure with some functions, a common thing to do would be to pass a kind of reference to the data structure as the first argument to any function that worked on that data structure. And in fact, this syntax is really just a shortcut for doing that. So another way to call the method that greet refers to would be like this. I could just write greet, and the first argument here could just be P, and the second argument could be our greeting. Let's write this is, for example. So this syntax is actually equivalent to this. When we run it, we see we've got this is Bob coming out on the console. So this is well worth trying out. We are going to move on to looking at lambda expressions, which are probably a more typical thing to set a variable equal to. But it's really useful to have a good working knowledge of how we construct the types of variables that refer to functions or methods. So that's it for this time. Until next time, happy coding.